China is by far the biggest manufacturer and installer and user of clean energy and electric vehicles. China still gets a lot of its electricity from coal. It uses the most coal of any country in the world, is the leading emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. There's many Americans who still support climate action. A certain amount of that action might involve working with China, buying Chinese technologies. But we also have to admit that there are serious geopolitical concerns about Chinese dominance over those technologies. Chinese companies need to recognize that other countries won't accept a world in which no other country can participate in these industries.
How is environmentalism in China different than environmentalism in the US?
The thing to understand about the current Chinese move towards environmentalism is that it's primarily motivated by developmental motives, which is quite different than the story of environmentalism that we're familiar with in the West, which starts in the 1960s with Earth Day and citizen movements pushing the government officials to pass the environmental laws that we have today, like the Clean Air Act or the Clean Water Act. I think in the Chinese context, Chinese officials originally had thought of environmental protection as maybe a limit on development, but then they started to see opportunities for economic development through pushing green. So producing solar panels, producing wind turbines, producing electric vehicles, those sorts of things.
What challenges and successes has China faced with its approach to environmentalism?
If you just look at China maybe 25 years ago, there's a lot of reason to say China was in the middle of an environmental crisis. Right? Pollution was at extraordinary levels. If you traveled the country, you'd see areas where people were really suffering from environmental pollution. China's environmental problems are by no means resolved, but they've made progress in a couple of different areas. One is in pollution reduction, so air pollution, especially in the major urban areas like around Beijing, Shanghai, Guangdong. They've substantially reduced pollution by pushing for the installation of new technologies to control pollution. And you can see the success through satellite data. NASA satellite data shows that pollution has reduced. And I think the other big area of success is in promotion of clean energy. Right? So China is by far the biggest manufacturer and installer and user of clean energy and electric vehicles, so clean energy and clean transportation. They by far have surpassed what any other country in the world is doing. It's true that China still gets a lot of its electricity from coal. It uses the most coal of any country in the world as well, and that produces outsized greenhouse gas emissions. China is the leading emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. But it seems like they may be starting to turn the corner on this. They're building out renewable energy at a faster pace than their energy demand is growing. And so it's leading to some displacement of coal use. They're talking about using coal more as backup than as the primary driver of electricity production. And so if they keep building out renewables and shifting more energy production to those renewables and using those resources fully, then you're going to get more reductions in emissions. China, last year or two, has decreased its greenhouse gas emissions slightly, and they have a goal to peak their emissions before 2030, and the ultimate goal is carbon neutral by 2060, so that's a long time away. But obviously the trends have to start moving sharply downward if they're to achieve that goal. And they've made the beginnings of that and certainly laid the foundations for that transition.
What role do different actors have in China's push for environmental action?
The Chinese story is both top-down, which gets a lot of attention, and it's the way that the Chinese state presents itself. But there's also a societal component, so society contribution to this move that is worth noting. So I think from the top-down perspective, it's worth giving credit for sustained policy that pushes in a uniform direction, right? So goals over multiple five-year plans, starting really in earnest in the 11th five-year plan, I would say 20 years ago, and pushing for pollution reduction, greater energy efficiency, and the development of renewable energy and transportation. In a period where the United States is really facing policy whiplash, depending on who's president, we get radically different environmental policy. I hope that Americans can see the benefits of having more consistent policy and come to some political compromise that would allow us to achieve something that most Americans would want. On the bottom-up side, I think the thing that's less well known is that China has a lot of relatively small, not particularly well funded environmental groups that have played important roles over the years in just raising awareness and pushing certain environmental issues, getting them on the agenda. And also just community groups all around the country that not necessarily be organized in some way, but that faced pollution in their local area and were worried about it and stood up to polluters and pushed for it. I think you have to give credit for all of them for creating the environment to show that people cared about these things and wanted there to be improvements. And I think that's often missed in the narratives about China being top down and the West being bottom up, right? I think both sides have a little bit of the elements of the other. So China's maybe more bottom up than people like to think. And the US government has played an important role in a way that often people don't like to talk about because of the political culture in the United States.
Is there still space for meaningful US-China environmental collaboration?
Given the geopolitical dynamics, cooperation on environment is more important than ever. It's essential if we want to move forward on this issue, right? There was a way in the last couple of presidential administrations where, as geopolitical tensions increased, people said, well, climate's an area where we're more cooperative, we're more friendly, and let's do the cooperative thing and it'll smooth the way for better relations in more tense areas. The fact of the matter is that just about every area has become tense, and it's become so tense that I think everyone just acknowledges that that's the reality of our relationship, and we need to just directly confront the tension points and the areas of agreement, right? So in clean tech competition, despite what the president is saying that right now, there's many Americans who still support climate action and want this to move forward. I think in order to achieve those goals, a certain amount of that action might involve working with China, buying Chinese technologies. But we also have to admit that there are serious geopolitical tensions, concerns about Chinese dominance over those technologies. There's a sense that it's not a good thing for the world to have certain technologies that are essential for energy transition to be completely controlled by Chinese manufacturing. And there's an interest in creating alternative supply chains so that you have multiple options if geopolitical tensions rise further, or if, God forbid, you have another COVID-like situation that just shuts down certain supply chains. And so I think much of the world is interested in that right now. So working together to figure out a way to come to accommodations, right? So I think in Europe, they're interested in buying Chinese products, but they would also like to support their own companies to do well in these areas. I think there are obviously very important issues over fairness and levels of subsidies. And so that involves some negotiation. And I think countries will play hardball to protect their own interests. But also, I think there is greater willingness to talk about the details about how do you, let's say, learn from Chinese technologies now where they're ahead. So licensing Chinese battery technologies, for example, or learning from Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers or clean energy manufacturers. But finding a way that you might work with China, but also allow American or European or other companies to also develop. I think Chinese companies need to recognize that that's a great concern, that other countries won't accept a world in which no other country can participate in these industries. And so I would find it hard to believe that Chinese companies couldn't imagine some compromises in which it would allow other companies to get a piece of the pie.
What can the US learn from China's approach to environmentalism?
If we're talking about what the US can learn from China, I think China's long-term focus on achieving clean tech dominance is obviously something that we should look at because they've been highly successful in it. The way the US has approached it has been either from a sort of trying to stop China perspective or trying to support American competition and American growth. I think the first, trying to stop China, has largely been unsuccessful. And so I would like to see much more investment in strengthening America and growing American capacity. And so that, to me, would be the thing that we have not done enough of. And so we don't know how it'll play out. And I think we need to invest in that area. I think on the area to be cautious about, these days there's so much discussion about Chinese clean tech dominance. that it's almost creating a sense that China is really doing everything right on the environment, right? They're a climate leader or climate champion. But that view just neglects the fact that as China is pushing development, it's creating all sorts of environmental pressures on ecosystems, on natural lands all around the world as Chinese companies go out. And so even while we say China's done a nice job on providing technologies we need, I think we need to focus on different areas. The impact of Chinese dams on ecosystems, the dynamics of Chinese infrastructure projects and their impacts on ecological systems around the world. I think all of these things require healthy debate and accountability and policies that encourage Chinese companies, Chinese financial institutions to behave in more ecological ways.